Welcome to SciTech Culture with Steve Kern and Ben Warner, where we examine science, technology, and culture in the 21st century. Visit our website at scitechculture.com. Hello and welcome to SciTech Culture, the show where we discuss science, technology, and culture in its myriad of forms. My name is Ben Warner, and I'm joined once again by my good friend and colleague, Steve Kern. How are we today, Steve? You brought the ambience with you today, that nice rainy feel. How are you?
It is. Hi, Ben. Yes, it's finally raining here. It's a long way into autumn, so you'd hope to see some rain, but we've been having lovely warm weather.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. But at least we're getting a free ambient soundtrack for all of the listeners out there. We've been off for a little while just through some scheduling and various things, but we're back, and we thought we'd come to I don't know if you'd call it an iOS versus Android type thing. I think we've had enough discussions to say they both have their merits and whatnot, but I guess we've got some direct experience here in terms of yourself, Steve, with having gone from iOS to Android now, and how that's gone. Can you maybe just give us a bit of an overview of that, like what you went to, and what was the rationale behind it in the first instance?
Okay, I went from let's go. I went from Nokia N95, which at the time I think was pretty much the equivalent to the iPhone 3S. Anyway, there was no competition there. I had an iPhone 4S for 4 years, and then at the start of or the end of last year, swapped to a Sony Xperia Z5 compact, which has been an experience changing away from iOS. Definitely, I think you have to say Apple has got the hardware, software interface all stitched up. The design's lovely, but there are, as you say, there are some advantages now I'm starting to find being on Android. User experience is necessarily one of them.
But what was that initial sort of reasoning? What made you want to do that jump? Like instead of just going for another iPhone, for instance.
Oh, look! If the iPhone SE had been out, I would have bought an iPhone SE. I wanted a small format phone, and the Z5 Compact is basically it's about the same size as an iPhone 5.
Yeah.
So that's what I wanted to go for, and so I got the Sony.
Okay.
It's not a badly spec'd phone.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, we'll cover that in a moment. But in terms of getting yourself across from one platform to another, I think in your particular, I mean, you can probably go through it in a minute, but I think in your experience, it was probably a bit more straightforward than, say, some other people because you weren't so heavily invested in iOS.
Well, that's right. I don't carry music on my phone at all. And I also basically, to transfer is nothing huge for me compared to a typical Apple or Android user. I did have a look at the interfaces, though, at the time that gave the option to transfer all your data across. Sony and Apple both provide some fairly clever and a very easy to use software to transfer your data that you might want and music. But I have heard from people who have done it, as always, it's never quite as straightforward as you would want it to be. There's always a bug or something going on in there. But by and large, you can do it, yes.
And so what would you say is the biggest advantage from going from I guess, leaving aside the technical improvements over a 4-year period that you had the iPhone 4S to what you got with the Android phone, but what was the big jump for you that you thought was beneficial in terms of getting an Android phone?
Okay, well, because I was going to say the only big jump that really happened was a backwards one because 4-year-old iPhone 4S has still got a better user experience than the Android phone. But I think the two big things that also swayed me, and there's probably 3 things now that I've got to learn the phone. One is the battery life. So it's a genuine 2-day battery life on the phone. The second is memory. Yep. So you put a micro SD, you can have up to, I think it's 256 gig.
Yeah.
It's huge. 200 gig, I think you can have on there. And the third is that you can actually swap users. Android allows you to swap users, which for privacy, probably not on a macro scale, i.e. Google always knows that you're swapping users, and if you're using another user account, as would Facebook too, I imagine. But your smaller apps that you might use and typically plug into things like Google or Facebook don't get that data that they normally would get access to. So on that level, I guess, that's nice.
I guess the whole user switching thing is important. It's been a big complaint on the iOS side of things, but if you see how they've actually developed the platform, they just haven't developed a platform that's easy for that to happen. I'm just thinking of in terms of like a corporate IT infrastructure, where if you think of your PC rollout in an office environment, and you get multiple users using the PCs, they will download, for instance, user profiles onto each computer, so that when you pop back into it, it'll just pull off that user profile or update it depending on when it hits the server and whatnot. But maybe that's not as simple to do on a mobile device, which, I mean, it could be done easier on Macs, for instance, but on a phone or at least the way they've designed the iOS platform at this stage.
I think it would be an iOS design they set out to do. Now to change would be very, very difficult. Getting back to that user thing, and once again, maybe it's not such an issue with Apple, because you've got the great firewall of Apple around all your data when you use Apple devices. For, say, though, for instance, on my phone, on an Android phone, you can swap users and you can have all your finance details in one account.
Yeah.
So it's quarantined. You don't put any other apps on. You even delete Facebook and all those things from there and just keep it there. You can also then have another user account on there that's strictly business. So you might just have your LinkedIn, and you're not mixing your LinkedIn and Facebook apps, because the one thing you learn when you start to go through the back end and use all these user groups and permissions, you realise that really a lot of apps on your phone, if you leave them open, it's a bit like the browser window. They're talking to each other. They're scanning. So it's a very nice way, I guess, to keep a lot of that intrusive knowledge of what you do down to just Facebook and Google. So, but it is, I find that a very useful feature, particularly if you have work accounts. So you might be in charge of social media at work or have an admin account at work, and we all know in Apple land you can only sign in with one Facebook account and that's it.
Yeah.
On your mobile device. This allows you to separate them right out and avoid the overlap. So it's good from that perspective. Yeah, very.
Yeah. One small point too, the expandable memory part of it is also an important thing to mention. Obviously, iOS doesn't have the ability to expand its memory. You basically have to buy that up front, and I can't see how a 16 gig phone compared to a 64 gig phone is suddenly worth $100 more in terms of getting back their production cost. But they've got a good marketing system in place there for getting that extra revenue, if you like. And the thing that has annoyed me is that the 16 gig variant is actually useless, because the amount of apps and data that you use these days, especially now we've got 4K video on the phones too, 16 gig is just not going to cut it these days, and that is something where they should really improve. I mean, I know they probably will never maybe start with the entry model at 64 gigs until maybe 100 years in the future or whatever, but they could at least do a 32 gig variant just to make it a bit easier for people.
Oh, absolutely. But someone has done the calculation and worked out data between 16 and 64 and how long people keep the phone. So you'll probably find that, if you change your phone every 2 years, that will be the difference in price of either buying iCloud access or paying extra for your 64 gig.
Oh, they're certainly not hurting from that from that business model anyway.
Doesn't seem like it at the moment.
I was reading an article on AndroidAuthority.com that just goes through some of the various differences between iOS and Android and what you get from each one. in a summary towards the end, they're basically saying with iOS, you ask what your device can do and you stick with that, while Android, you ask yourself what you want to happen and then find out how Android can do it. So
yeah, that's right. You spend a lot of time with an Android device asking yourself, is it going to do it?
So that, I mean, you know, I've heard the jokes that, you know, people see me using an iPhone, and if they're using, and this might be a little bit of a segue into the next part of our conversation about Apple and whether or not it's becoming Microsoft of today. This idea that this big behemoth of a corporation is telling you how you need to run your device because of their closed system. And I get jokes where people are using their Samsung phones and you know, oh yeah, you can't do that because Apple's told you can't use your phone that way, and then they talk about as if it's this big bad corporation that's out to get you. And it's an interesting or no, not interesting, it's an ironic twist, given that Apple was such a long time the underdog, especially in the Apple versus Microsoft days, and Microsoft was the big bad. And it's just the old tall poppy syndrome. I would have thought that they've gone to the top. They haven't really changed what they're doing. You could argue that maybe they've lost a bit of their innovative spirit now that Steve Jobs isn't there, but they still haven't really changed what they've been doing. It's just they're doing it at a much larger scale. But now they're the big bad guys because they're at the top of the heap instead of being, you know, trying to crawl their way up to the top.
Well, that's right. Once you get to the top of the heap, everyone wants to roll you. But you know, you look back to the Microsoft comparison, and yeah, that's where Microsoft was, you know, 15 years ago. That's the way everyone felt about it. But Apple have got a very clear business model, and I think we've seen that. You know, they've really become a consumer device, hardware to software sort of solution, I guess is what they would term it. Whereas now we're seeing, you know, we're seeing a lot of the really old legacy companies like IBM turn purely to software models. And Microsoft, which finds itself in that space, is trying a little bit of the hardware thing with their Surface, and maybe not very well with their phones. But they're also moving into a lot more of these software solution models. You know, the monthly subscription to a service. And I think, you know, what you're really seeing now is probably Apple, I guess, using that legacy of their great design and great, operating system together and leveraging on that. And they're the only company really left doing it. I think, you know, you probably find, I don't know, is there anyone else doing it anymore?
Well, I guess one
Samsung maybe with the phones, but I don't know.
Yeah, possibly. I guess one way of looking at it, and this is where a lot of this argument comes in, that they've become the new Microsoft, is that the iPhone has become such a behemoth of a business that it could be its own company on its own. And it's become such a vital part of their, their success that it's almost analogous to what Windows was for Microsoft in the mid to late 90s and the early 2000s, where if you took Windows out of Microsoft, which is in effect what's happened now, which is why they've had to restructure and do a whole bunch of drastically different things to stay relevant. If you take that core business out, what are they in terms of going forward? I don't think Apple's is in as bad a problem there, because Microsoft, I think they had Office, I guess, as their other big successful thing, and they did. You know, they've got a lot of success in the enterprise, but if you have a look at those individual products, with Windows becoming less and less relevant, that's where Microsoft started to hit a bit of a snag there, I guess, in terms of their development. And to their credit, they've actually, you know, turned it around in terms of seeing where it's going, and they've updated their business model. But it should be interesting to see what happens when if the iPhone at some stage, and it will happen at some stage, the smartphone will no longer be relevant. Something will take its place. What's Apple going to do then? Are they going to be there? Are they going to be the ones that have got the replacement? You know, we're talking, you know, it might not happen for 20 or 30 years. Who knows how long it'll take? You know, they're sailing well now, but what is that replacement? And I guess, a lot of especially Wall Street types who are focused on how much growth can they get, and they're not looking at oh, that's a great product. They're looking at the growth and everything. I think that's where a lot of that commentary comes from.
Oh, look, completely agree. I think it was probably often overlooked at the time because they've never been seen as trendy or sexy. But IBM's decision to leave hardware behind always seemed odd. I mean, they'd been a hardware company, and really, in terms of PCs, they were seen as the platform of excellence, I think, right, probably up until about the 21st century with the dot-com boom then. That was probably the first time they sort of drifted. And now they've come back, they've focused on software. They've obviously realised there was too much competition in the hardware space. They gave up, I think, at around Windows 95 was when IBM gave up on its own operating system, which was Warp 2 or whatever it was. And then they moved to software. And I remember at the time, couldn't really understand what sort of software they were going to produce. And now they're at the forefront of AI and business solutions. So, you're absolutely right. Some stage, Apple will find that it's got a very defined product that, like Coca-Cola today, might not be the only drink. There might be a whole range of sports drinks that come along that everyone else prefers, or energy drinks over your traditional soda. So it'll be interesting. I think, you're saying 20 or 30 years. I think it might be as little as 10 years.
Absolutely. 25. I guess an analogy that that can help, which I think we've discussed before. If you look at companies, BlackBerry is a good example. They don't innovate. They get left behind. But the one that I think is even more relevant would be a company like Kodak. Yeah. The digital revolution came through and basically cleaned them out.
The digital camera. That's the irony.
Yep. So and all it was a culture of sticking to it's never going to happen. Our product's better and all that, but it's the old Larry the Liquidator speech out of other people's money. It's at one point someone made the best buggy whip you ever saw, but becomes obsolete if some new technology comes in and wipes it away and makes it irrelevant. So so it is interesting. Okay, just quickly, I think we'll move on to just our last bit. Just I guess before that too. So going from iOS to Android, you thought it was a smooth enough experience, do you think?
Yeah, the changeover was pretty good. As I was saying, the hiccup people normally have is with iTunes. But otherwise, look, it was smooth enough. It took me probably took me 3 months to lower my expectations to Android's level, and now that I have, it's fine.
And I guess if you're really tech inspired or techie, or have that enthusiastic desire for it, you just run them all, and then you don't have to worry about it.
Well, I mean, look, if I was really some sort of crazy, ultra clever hacker, I'd probably be running a VPN from one of my other user profiles and logging anonymously everywhere and whatever else. So I don't know, but it's okay. Android's adequate, and Sony phones are actually pretty good. Yeah, but they're just not as good as Apple.
Okay, and just finally, I just wanted to touch quickly on this notion of how much computing power we actually need in today's world. And we've covered this a little bit before, I think, in an earlier episode where we were just saying that computers had become good enough 5 years ago or 6 years ago. But essentially, my thought was that I've got now a 2-year-old iPhone, which I'll probably upgrade later on in the year. But even that phone has now become, I think, arguably my primary PC, and I've been amazed at how I've shifted away from, I'm using the laptop now for this, to do this podcast, but essentially all of the day-to-day stuff, I don't actually need to use it, really. It's more just a sense of, tradition that, I like to still whip it out and still use it. And, when I think of future options for what I could use and whatnot, there isn't any need, as long as these computers I've got are still working, for me to do anything. I've got a computer, sitting on my desk in the iMac from 2008 that still does everything perfectly fine, except for the high-end video editing, which I can do off of this MacBook that I've got in front of me.
Yeah.
So you kind of got to wonder what people, in terms of an advice point of view, you shouldn't really tell them that they need the latest and greatest thing, because quite often they probably don't, and there's probably a $200 computer that could do everything that they want today, whereas I think, especially for people like us that grew up in that generation where we were always looking for something better, at least even a year after we got our computer, it seems now that question is largely irrelevant in terms of technical ability. So it's quite interesting that it's gotten to that point.
I think it's great. I mean, I always dreamed of this. I mean, imagine 15 or 20 years ago not thinking if only I had a faster computer. We were always stressed out about it.
Yeah.
You're always stressed out about like your clock speed of your computer. Because a new one had just come out always. It was, 3 months after you bought yours, it was faster again.
Yep.
It's like, so now it's good. We really don't need a lot of computing power. And anyway, a lot of it's shifting to the cloud. So a lot of these software subscription models, big databases run through the cloud. Business analysis run through the cloud. And once, it's probably not such an issue in the US or places with better internet. Australia's not great. We all know that. Once we can get over our bandwidth issues and can move data up and down from the cloud quickly, there won't be any need really for servers on the ground. Everything will be a virtual service. So really to access that, you need less and less power. And the architecture now anyway on the chips inside our phones is amazing. I mean, It's got so much power that if you had a phone back then, it would run tasks so much more quickly. So, I think it is the post-PC era really gaining pace.
Yeah, I mean, I can only just quickly before we wrap it up, I was just thinking that back in the old days before I had my Mac laptops, and this isn't an endorsement of Apple or anything, but because it would have been the same even if I had the Apple laptops back then. But I used to used to get to year 2 or even 18 months in when I had a Windows laptop, and I would think, this is starting to grind. I'd have to, maybe reinstall software and do that. And even like these days, I'm using a 2-year-old laptop now that is working just as good as the first day I got it. And even if I had a Windows PC, it would be the same story if I'd gotten an equivalent one. So that to me is amazing. It's like you said, you don't stress out about whether or not it's going to, be up to the task, so to speak.
And just for our listeners, Ben, if you're editing video 15 years ago, it was very stressful.
Oh, absolutely. You didn't know whether it was going to stay on or not.
We're going to crash during this render or crash during this output because I've maxed the RAM.
Yeah. We'll have to, we might have to do some sort of big retro app on that or something in the future. All right, we might wrap it up there, Steve. So thanks again for that. It's we'll keep in touch with your Android experience there, and whether or not you may still continue on with it.
We'll see.
Absolutely. All right, so don't forget our website, scitechculture.com. You can get all of our links and content there. You can interact with us on Twitter, Google+, and Facebook. So I'd love to hear from you. We've got our photos on Instagram and Flickr. And feel free to send anyone to the website if you like our regular chats, and hopefully more regular chats. We have a couple of breaks every now and then, but the show's a bit more flexible these days. That's the way we've designed it. So, but send them through. We'd love to hear from you there, and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. All right, so that's it for this episode. We'll catch you next time.